oiseaux du lac pic-pac, pic-pic, glou 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 font tous les dindons, et la jolie cloche ding-ding-dong.
Recording. Hello again, it's me Chaz back with another video, and in this video we are going to discuss the 1938 World Cup qualifiers. A total of 37 teams originally competed for 14 spots for a chance to win the third ever World Cup. France, as the hosts, automatically qualified for the World Cup. This will be the first time that a nation automatically qualified for the World Cup as the hosts. There were no qualifying rounds in the very first World Cup in 1930, so Uruguay already qualified. And in 1934, Italy, even though they were the hosts of that tournament, they still needed to qualify for the tournament that they hosted. They did beat Greece, and that's how they were able to qualify for 1934 World Cup, which they did eventually end up winning. And because of their win, they were the holders, and they also automatically qualified for the 1938 World Cup. So again, that leaves 14 other spots. There was a total of 9 different groups for the nations in Europe to see who will qualify. A total of 13 nations originally from Europe qualified for the 1938 World Cup. However, one nation did eventually withdraw from competing at the 1938 World Cup. I will discuss that team when I get to them, but I'm going to start this off with talking about the first group, Group 1. Group 1 had a total of 4 different nations. The top 2 nations in this group would qualify for the World Cup. Each team will play each other on just one occasion. They'll either play home or away. The 4 nations in this group was Germany, who were trying to qualify for their second World Cup. They had a great run back in the 1934 World Cup, reaching their semi-finals. They were knocked out by Czechoslovakia, but they did win their third place playoff match against Austria. That was the first time there was ever a third place playoff match. They were joined by Sweden. Sweden also competing in their second World Cup qualifiers. They did qualify for the last World Cup themselves as well. And they did meet Germany in the quarterfinals, where Germany did defeat Sweden 2-1. The other 2 nations in this group, Estonia, who did try to qualify for the World Cup last time, back in 1934. They were in the same group as Sweden in the World Cup qualifiers back in 1934. And the match between Sweden and Estonia, which ended in a 6-2 win for Sweden, was the very first World Cup qualifying match. Finally, Finland also joined this group, and this would be the first time Finland would try to attempt to qualify for the World Cup. The top 2 teams in this group ended up being Sweden and Germany. Germany topping this group by 6 points. Sweden had 4, Estonia with 2 points, and Finland with 0 points. Sweden had the opening 2 games, first playing against Finland, where they beat Finland 4-0 in the Rosunda Stadium in Stockholm. The stadium was only just a month old when this match took place. Unfortunately, the stadium's been demolished since the early 2010s. It's been knocked down. Lennart Bunke opened the scoring for Sweden in this game. He was scoring the hour mark for Sweden in their 4-0 win over Finland. He actually did score in Sweden's first World Cup qualifying game against Estonia. So a solid win for Sweden there. They did go into the next game against Estonia. Again, previously, they beat Estonia 2 in the first World Cup qualifying match. They do one better by this time beating Estonia 7-2. So a great 2 wins for Sweden, puts them in a great position. Now it was Finland's time to play 2 home games back to back. They played Germany first and was defeated 2-0 in the Bollus Stadium in Helsinki, Finland. Ernest Leinas opened the scoring for Germany in that game. He did score in the World Cup, scored in the third place playoff game against Austria in Germany's 3-2 win over them. He actually scored the first ever third round playoff goal. And that was only in 1 minute. So again, good start for Germany. This more or less finished Finland's chances of qualifying. Finland would go up against Estonia next and lose 1-0 to Estonia. Estonia would win that game. Richard Kjorma scored the winner for Estonia, and that would be Estonia's first ever World Cup qualifying win. So that was a little bit of a bounce back for Estonia, but then they would take on Germany next away at the Horst Wessel Stadium. Germany won 4-1. Again, goals from Ernst Lehner and Joseph Guanchel. 2 goals from both of them make the game 4-1. And meant that both Germany and Sweden qualified together. Germany would beat Sweden later in that year, 5-0 win for them, including 2 goals from Otto Siffling, who did score in the World Cup against Belgium, but both nations already did qualify before this match took place. Germany and Sweden have a lot of history at the World Cup, and in the Euros go up against each other a lot of times. The overall record is actually quite close. Germany slightly having the edge, but when it comes to important matches, Germany have won most of them. The main match which Sweden did beat Germany in was the semi-finals of the 1958 World Cup, where Sweden were the host of that tournament. But when it comes to the key games, important matches, Germany has dominated Sweden. The last time Germany and Sweden have met each other was the 2018 World Cup, where once again Germany went and won that game. With that said, Sweden was the ones that actually topped that group, and Germany was bottom of the group. But yeah, back to 1938. Sweden, Germany qualify. In the second group, just 2 nations, both Norway and Irish Free State, which would eventually become the Republic of Ireland. Those 2 nations competed. Both teams would play each other home and away, and the team with the most points would qualify for the World Cup. Ireland did compete at the very first World Cup qualifiers, but failed to qualify. I believe they had both Netherlands and Belgium in their group. Right, so the first game took place in Norway at the Unival Stadium in Oslo. This is Norway's national stadium. So yeah, Norway's still playing games there. I think it was opened originally in 1920s, sometime in the 1920s. Norway did win that game 3-2. By the way, Norway again was making their debut for the World Cup qualifying. Reidar Klavman scored in the 30th minute and the 64th minute, which made him the first Norwegian to ever score a World Cup qualifying goal and the first to score 2 goals in a game for Norway. The first goal was a goal that saw Norway go ahead. The second goal he scored in the 64th minute was an equaliser. Alf Martinsen would score the last goal in that game to secure Norway the win. The next match between them and Irish Free State, this time taking place in Dublin, in Delmart Park. It became a 3-3 thriller. Again, 2 goals from Claverman and Martin scored as well. With the earlier win Norway had against Irish Free State in the first match, this would secure Norway's win and they will qualify for the World Cup for the first time. Irish Free State, or eventually the Republic of Ireland, would eventually qualify for the World Cup, but that would be all the way into the 90s. I believe it was 1990, I think 1990 in Italy is when they qualified for the World Cup for the first time. Okay, let's move on to the third group. This was, again, just two teams. We have Poland, who are trying to compete for the second time at World Cup qualifiers, a second chance for them to try and qualify for their first World Cup, and Yugoslavia, who reached the semi-finals of the first World Cup, but failed to qualify for the second World Cup. Again, similar to Group 2, in this group, both nations will play each other home and away. Poland won their first one 4-0 and picked up their first World Cup qualifying win. Leonard Paltek scored 2 goals for Poland. He became the first Polish player to score 2 goals in a World Cup qualifying game and helped secure Poland's win over Yugoslavia. This match took place in the Polish Army Stadium. I think that's the name, or Wojciech Polskiego Stadium. Poland play a few of their national games still there. Legii and play their home games there in that stadium. Second game, Yugoslavia do win this time around. They only beat Poland by 1-0. Not enough. Poland will go through on goal difference and they would qualify for their first World Cup. Okay, in the fourth group, Romania took on Egypt. Egypt actually withdrew from this tournament qualifiers. I think it's because of timing, and I believe maybe because of religious reasons as well. Yeah, Egypt didn't want to play the match on the match schedule, I believe, and FIFA considered this a withdrawal, so Romania was able to qualify without having to play a game. And this would be Romania's third World Cup in a row that they've qualified for. They did compete at the very first World Cup back in 1930. In the fifth group, you have Switzerland and Portugal, just two teams again. But this time around, these two nations only played the one match against each other in a neutral stadium. They played at the Stadio Civico Arena in Milan. Switzerland defeated Portugal 2-1. This will be now the second World Cup that Switzerland qualified for. And for Portugal, this will be the second time that they failed to qualify for a World Cup. It will take Portugal to 1966, where they would qualify for their first World Cup. Group 6, a little different here. There was 2 different rounds. The first round was between 2 nations, Greece and British Mandate, Palestine. This nation, or this team, would eventually become the current Israel nation, so different from the current Palestine team as well. Greece and British Mandate Palestine would again compete against each other both home and away. Greece would win both matches 3-1 and 1-0 and would move on to the final round where they would take on Hungary. This time only playing one match against Hungary. Hungary beats Greece 11-1. I believe this is the biggest victory in the UEFA Zone World Cup qualifying. Zengala, who would score 5 goals in this game, becoming Hungary's first goal scorer to score a hat-trick at a World Cup qualifying game. Again, he would score 5 goals in this match. But he wasn't the only player in his team, in the Hungarian team, to score a hat-trick in this game. Joseph Nemes also scored a hat-trick. Huge win for Hungary. Hungary do qualify for their second World Cup in a row. And Hungary had a better World Cup in 1938 than they did in 1934, where they did reach the final. Okay, in Group 7, we have Czechoslovakia, who did reach the final. They were the runners-up of the 1934 World Cup, being beaten by Italy in extra time. They went up against Bulgaria. First game ended in a 1-1 draw for both nations. Bulgaria had a late penalty. Georgi Pachachev scored for Bulgaria to get a point from that match. However, in a return leg, Czechoslovakia won 6-0. Ladislav Šimoník became Czechoslovakia's first player to score a hat-trick in a World Cup qualifying match. Now he wasn't the only person to score goals in that game for Czechoslovakia. Oldrich Nejedly, who was the top scorer of the 1934 World Cup and the first player in Czechoslovakia's history to score a hat-trick at the World Cup, scored 2 goals in this game. And Josef Ludo also scored for Czechoslovakia. With this win, again, Czechoslovakia would qualify for their second World Cup in a row. Okay, now Group 8. Similar to Group 6, there was 2 rounds. The first round was between Latvia and Lithuania. Both teams played a match home and away against each other. Latvia won both of their matches 4-2 and 5-1. That's how they got through to the second round. Latvia were making their debut, so 2 goals from Kanips for Latvia made him their first player to ever score a goal and 2 goals at a World Cup. For Latvia, he would also score another 2 goals in the second game against Lithuania. But what was waiting Latvia was Austria. Austria do beat Latvia 2-1, even though Latvia were in the lead for less than 10 minutes. Austria equalised and went on to winning that game. Now, Austria is the team that I mentioned earlier that did withdraw after being annexed by Germany and becoming part of Germany. Austria, I love the Austrian players, stopped playing for Austria and joining the Germany team. Eventually, the Austria team withdrew from the 1938 World Cup. They would return back to the World Cup in 1954. Okay, and for the final group in the Eurozone, again, this was before UEFA was a thing. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg were all put in the same group. This would be the second time Netherlands and Belgium would be put in the same group. They were in the same group back in 1934 World Cup qualifiers, where they both qualified for that one. And again, they qualified for this as well. Netherlands beat Luxembourg in the De Kuip Stadium. This is where Feyenoord plays their home games. Yeah, massive win there for Netherlands. Kit Smith scored the opener for Netherlands in this game. He also was the first player from Netherlands to ever score a goal at the World Cup qualifiers, and also became the first player to score a goal at the World Cup itself. Sorry, Piet de Bruyne scored a hat-trick in this game against Luxembourg. He became the first player from the Netherlands to ever score a World Cup qualifier hat-trick. Belgium would then take on Luxembourg. Belgium would beat Luxembourg 3-2 and goal from Verhoef. Bernard Verhoef was Belgium's first ever player to score a goal at the World Cup. He played at the 1930 World Cup, but Belgium failed to score in that World Cup. But in 1934, though they did lose to Germany, they did score. He actually scored 2 goals in that game for Belgium. But yes, with this win for Belgium, Luxembourg was knocked out, and that meant that both Belgium and the Netherlands qualified for the 1938 World Cup. They did go up against each other. That match did end up in a 1-1 draw. Belgium was at home in a Bossel stadium in Antwerp. A lot closer game for Belgium this time around. Last time, Netherlands beat them pretty heavy, 4-2 the last time they played each other. But yeah, this is another World Cup that both Belgium and Netherlands qualified for. Belgium, this will be the third time that they qualified, again being an OG 13, one of the first teams to ever compete at a World Cup, and Netherlands competing in the second World Cup at that time. Those were the 12 nations from Europe that qualified for the 1938 World Cup. Going to move on to the nations in the Americas. So with the Americas, I mentioned in my other videos that the Americas, the teams in the Americas in both North, Central and South America, very disappointed with the fact that this third World Cup would take place in Europe again. They expected that World Cup to be hosted by a nation in the Americas. I believe Argentina were the favourites to host that World Cup. But unfortunately for them, FIFA decided to give it to France. This angered a lot of the nations in the Americas, including the first ever World Cup winners, Uruguay, who did not compete at the 1934 World Cup because of their lack of representation from European nations in the 1930 World Cup. So with all of them withdrawing, Brazil became the lone South American nation without having to play a match to qualify for the 1938 World Cup. For the Central American nations, again, a lot of them withdrew themselves. Well, there was originally a group which had Colombia in with Costa Rica, Dutch Guiana, which name would eventually be Suriname, El Salvador and Mexico. They all withdrew. I think a lot of that would also be because of the late entrance from Argentina. Again, that's another reason why these nations withdrew. I believe this is a big reason why Mexico withdrew. So that left Cuba with a interconfederation playoff spot. So they would still have to try and qualify. Originally, the USA was going to compete against the nation that won the Central America table. But again, a lot of changes happened. And the Americas wasn't the only continent to deal with withdrawals. The Dutch East Indies and Japan in the AFC. Well, at the time, there was no AFC at the time, but those two Asian nations were supposed to compete against each other to see who would be the lone nation from Asia to qualify for the 1938 World Cup. Whoever did win would have become the first Asian nation to ever compete at the World Cup. Due to the Second Shina War, Japan withdrew. Again, they were in the middle of a war, so they withdrew, and this allowed the Dutch Indies to advance to the playoffs. Now let's move on to the playoffs. So nations in the playoffs was the USA, Indonesia, Cuba, and Argentina. 2 playoffs. So with playoff 1, it was the USA against Indonesia, or the Dutch East Indies, again, which would eventually become Indonesia. The USA withdrew from that match, and because of this, the Dutch Indies, without having to play a match, became the first Asian nation to ever qualify for a World Cup. And similar in the playoff 2 between Cuba and Argentina, Argentina also withdrew. This was more to do with civil matters in Argentina between the national team and local clubs. But with them withdrawing, Cuba became the first nation from the Caribbean to qualify for a World Cup. Unlike almost all the European nations other than Romania, all the nations outside of Europe, Brazil, Cuba, and the Dutch East Indies didn't have to play a match to qualify for the 1938 World Cup. So I'm going to mention those nations that qualified for the 1938 World Cup. We have Belgium, Brazil, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, the Dutch East Indies, France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Romania, Sweden, and Switzerland. Those were the 15 nations that made up the 1938 World Cup. Since this is the third World Cup, I'm going to name them the Hat Trick. Yeah, that's the name. I will be making videos going into detail on all 15 of those nations and how well they performed at the 1938 World Cup. Thanks for watching. This is quite a longer video than usual, but no, they're always long. But anyway, I do appreciate your listening, watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. Anyway, stay safe and bye.